We come now to verse 35 of the 8th chapter of the Gospel of John. Jesus has shocked some people by saying to them that if they remain in Him and continue in their faith in Him, then they will be free. And they, of course, protest that they've never been slaves to any man, which represents a kind of national subconscious idea, which nevertheless the actual history of this people would argue in the opposite direction. But one way or another, Jesus was speaking of something more profound than simply political slavery or some such thing. And as he continues to explain it, he makes the point that if a person is involved in committing sin, then that person is a slave of sin, that by the nature of the case, the only sort of person who would commit sin would be one who has, in fact, some sort of addiction to it. And that, of course, is a very different idea of slavery than probably they were contemplating in their original protest to his statement. So Jesus has made that point clear, and he continues now. Ho, the masculine singular nominative article, the, postpositive da, so but the, doulos, the standard word in the Greek language for slave, this is the nominative singular form of that word, so the slave, ou, the negation, mene, from meno, I remain, this is third person singular, present active indicative. The meaning of it, therefore, is he remains, so the slave, ou, does not remain in. The preposition takes the dative in te oikia, in the house, the dative of this feminine form of the word house. So the slave does not remain in the house. And then the description of this, eis ton iona. The word eis preposition takes the accusative here, the accusative article followed by the word ion, which means age, but idiomatically translates as forever. So the slave does not remain in the house forever. He's making reference here to a common idea, of course, in the ancient world, that a person who was a slave would not necessarily be attached to a certain house forever, that attachment could change. The owner could sell that person, though this is not a permanent arrangement. The slave does not remain in the house of the master, in other words, forever. Then he continues, ho huios, the son, mene, remains, same word as here, remains, eis ton iona, remains forever. If you're a son in a house, you're going to remain forever. If you're a slave, then your condition, your status in that house is somewhat more tentative and certainly up to the disposition of the master of the house. So Jesus here is possibly making reference to the house of Israel. That may be the idea. He said to them that if they are a slave of sin, then they are in that status of slave, and that presumably that might suggest that they could lose their status as being a member of this house. There are other ideas that have been suggested for this verse that probably gets closest to it, simply to say to these people that though they may have a claim to be Israelites, they may have a claim to some sort of status by virtue of their birth and practice, nevertheless, if they are a slave to sin, that status is by no means a reliable indicator of their actual situation before God.